Hello and welcome to Football Talk by the 2 Point Conversion. My name is Dylan Jackson. Today I'm joined by draft expert for the 2 Point Conversion, Jacob LaQuire. Jacob, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Can't complain. It's always fun to talk about football. And while we're still, what, 3.5 weeks out from the draft, it's better than where we were when we started, which was almost, 3 or 4 months. So really excited to get draft season moving and eventually get there.
It really is crazy to think just how close we are to the draft, just, 2, 3 weeks away. Um, Honestly, like it's been kind of a long process. The combine was back in February. Tons of rumors flew around then. Free agency started almost a month ago now, I think 20 or so days. So it's been quite a long process. I'm excited to kind of move forward. And we're going to have a live draft show on draft night. It's going to be really fun. We're going to have tons of guests. So if you are watching now, tune in for that on draft night. Follow the show here on Twitter and YouTube as well. We're just starting out. So, the early support is meaningful and it helps a lot. Today, Jacob and I are making some bold NFL predictions with less than a month to go before the draft. The main criteria here is, it's just a prediction that's somewhat unlikely in the current moment, but still relatively feasible. We both came with 5 predictions each, and we'll go ahead and get started. So, the first prediction that I had personally is that Emeka Egbuka, the Ohio State receiver, slot receiver, will be the first receiver taken that's not named Travis Hunter. So I think the reasoning behind this is relatively simple, and I think he is the player, the receiver that fits the most possible teams in this draft. His skill set, coming from the slot, very solid route runner. He's somebody who can play any of the three, wide receiver positions, X, Y, Z, and do it well. And there's a lot of teams, particularly in the back half of the first round, that could use a high floor player such as Emeka Egbuka. What do you kind of make of his skill set? And do you think it's somewhat feasible that he could be, the first receiver taken?
I do. The first non-Travis Hunter receiver, I feel like we got to throw
Correct.
that
Yeah.
disclaimer out there until we know what he's going to play. But no, I can really see this happening. You got to go back to, what was it, 2022, right? That was the Jordan Addison year, I believe. Maybe it was 2022. And the first receiver taken, Jackson Smith and Jigba, had a very
Yeah.
similar archetype, same school, right? Played primarily the slot receiver until his final year where he really broke out. Really similar build, skill set to Emeka Egbuka. And I think you nailed it when you said a lot of teams need a high floor player. I think Egbuka probably has the highest floor of all the first round guys that we're talking about. I think it's easiest to project him, right? Because he doesn't have to be the number one guy if he goes to a place like Seattle and reunites with JSN, or if he goes to somewhere like, I know Pittsburgh just signed, or not signed, traded for DK, but somewhere along that, right as the back half of the first round starts, I think you could really see him as that wide receiver 2 role. And a lot of teams need that. Like Tampa Bay, I guess, but they just re-signed Godwin. The Chargers are a huge one. Green Bay, they have their bevy of wide receiver 2s and 3s. They could always use a guy like that. So I don't think this one's too outlandish. And I think there's been a push recently, like on draft Twitter, of Emeka Egbuka going higher. Like he's kind of the prospect of the week, so to speak, this past 3 or 4 days for receivers. So I could really see him getting pushed up there.
We'll talk about Ted McMillan in a minute, but it's really, I guess, the main discourse around the first receiver, again, not named Travis Hunter, taken, has been revolved around either him or, especially after the combine, Matt Golden.
Mm-hmm.
I think with those two players in particular, it's a little bit more specific of a skill set that they offer. If you kind of run down the list of, potential teams, like, the Cardinals could feasibly take a receiver, maybe the Seahawks, maybe the Denver Broncos. I think all of those teams yeah, they might be interested in one of, Golden or Ted McMillan. Like the Broncos aren't necessarily going to be interested in a Ted McMillan just because he overlaps so similarly to Cortland Sutton, for instance. But they could easily slot in Emeka Egbuka and he'd be an immediate starter for them, for instance. So I think it really just comes down to he's the least common denominator receiver of this draft class, and I think that makes him, more valuable to more teams than what people may realize.
For sure. I think with that in mind, we can go ahead and hit my first bold take, and it involves Ted McMillan, the star receiver from Arizona. My bold take is that he's going to make it to day two. A lot of the discourse recently with big boards coming out. I know the Beast from Dane Brugler is about to come out soon, and people have had guys like Luther Burden fall out of the first round. The Missouri receiver James Pierce Jr., the Tennessee linebacker, and I think with other players getting pushed up, particularly Golden, who we talked about, Egbuka, if your bold take is to come true, I think the the lower floor for McMillan than both of those guys, and the specific skill set that teams will need to use him, I think that might push him down draft boards. Now, I, it's going to be hard for me if I'm one of the later teams to pass on him, but a team like, let's say, the Detroit Lions, or maybe the Buffalo Bills, right? They just re-signed Khalil Shakir. They traded, or they drafted Keon Coleman in the second round, not the first round last year, potentially a first round pick. Maybe they think that, hey, we need a weapon, but this guy kind of overlaps with Coleman, or he's not our guy. Let's go tight end. Or maybe the Rams think that, well, we just brought in Devontae Adams, so we don't need to super highly invest in receiver. All of this to say is, if the teams in the back half, and if McMillan makes it this far, don't view him as a guy that they can feasibly fit into their scheme like immediately, then I could see him making it to day two, and he could be one of those guys like a Brian Branch that somehow slips through the cracks and immediately gets taken up, or Joey Porter Jr. The year he went 33 overall, I want to say. One of the players that we think is a first rounder, has first round attributes, has a high ceiling, but maybe a lot of teams don't see him fitting into their scheme immediately, or they have other needs they feel they have to address. And that's really the crux of why I think he could be a victim of the draft slide we see every year.
Yeah, when you look at it, when you kind of consider how he's been talked about over the past month versus, the first few months of the draft process, it really does seem like the NFL is lower on Ted McMillan
Mhm.
than what the media is, right? Before maybe the combine, he was mocked as, consistently a top 10 player in most mock drafts. Now he's more of the 15 to 25 ish type range. And I do think it's feasible that he could fall out of the first round. I mean, I released a mock draft on Monday for the 2 point conversion where, I had him slotting into that Detroit Lions pick, right? 28th overall. The Lions had some interest in a guy like Xavier Legette. They brought him in for a workout last year. They very clearly, I think, could use an upgrade at their X receiver position, even if they already have a guy like, Jameson Williams. They already have Amon-Ra St. Brown in the slot, Laporta as well. But it seems like they're always going to be interested in upgrading their skill groups as well. So I think that it's hard for me to see him falling completely out of the first round just because you have the Lions there. I think the Bills could maybe use another receiver, even if they already have kind of an overlapping skill set in Keon Coleman. I think the Chiefs also make a lot of sense. It
Oh
would
yeah.
really round out their receiver group of Rasheed Rice and Xavier Worthy. So adding like a big X type of receiver to that offense to take on I guess what DeAndre Hopkins was doing for them this past season. I think that would be smart on their end. But like you said, I think this really just comes down to the NFL seems to be lower on Ted McMillan than what maybe the media has kind of thought.
And we see this every year, right? Like draft media. I was somebody who was really high on AD Mitchell from
Yeah.
Texas last year, and he falls to, I think, 50, right around pick 50. This was a guy that I had in my top 20 or 25, and he made it that far. And you never know. There's stuff that we don't know, like vis-a-vis medical or off-field stuff, and none of that seems to be a concern with McMillan. But you never know, right? Teams have all the information and people on the outside don't. And I think that can also contribute to somebody of his caliber sliding all the way out of the first round if this bold take is to come true. You said to come bold, so I had to start pretty big.
And it would be weird to see, right? Because it's rare that you see a receiver of, that produces as much as Ted McMillan did at Arizona, that has the traits that Ted McMillan has, fall completely out of the first round. That is not necessarily unheard of. I mean, like you said, I think most people viewed a guy like AD Mitchell as a first round receiver last year. It would be interesting to see, but I think the floor is late first round. I could see a world where people are wondering why he's available with the 33rd
Mhm.
overall pick. But moving on, I have a bold prediction. I think that one of Andrew Makuba, Xavier Watts, or Kevin Winston could sneak into the first round on draft night. I think really the one to watch here would be Kevin Winston, right? He looked incredible on his 2023 tape for Penn
Mhm.
State. He is incredibly athletic, but he did have ACL surgery just 6 months ago. So he's somebody that's going to raise a lot of medical red flags for teams. But I think it really only takes one team to make him a first round pick. And there's a lot of teams that need defensive back help in the back half of this first round. I could see him being the surprise pick in the latter half, especially because at the Penn State Pro Day, he ended up running a 4.5 40-yard dash, which is frankly incredible. So close to when he's coming off of a major knee surgery. So he's somebody that I could see really sneaking in. I think in my latest mock draft, this is kind of some of the thinking that I had. I'm pretty sure I put him to maybe the Baltimore Ravens or some other, or maybe it was the Washington Commanders, but I had him sneaking into the first round. I think there's a team that might be crazy enough to take him first round.
Yeah, and the skill set's pretty tantalizing, right? He has all the physicality or the physical tools you need. Really hard nosed tackler. Like you said, the 2023 tape is really good. When I was doing his evaluation, the Rutgers game from 2023 was one of my favorites to watch. That in the Michigan game, where he's going against a pretty strong, like physically strong Michigan team, and he held his own there. The question is going to be the injury stuff, right? And seeing him not only perform, but run quite a good number at his pro day. Like you're saying, just 5 or 6 months removed from ACL surgery bodes well for his recovery. It may not be like a Jonathan Brooks case, for example, where it took into the season for him to get onto the field. So I really could see it there. I'm more leaning Andrew Makuba. I think his ball skills and the range he's displayed this past season at Texas is going to be very valuable for a lot of teams, especially in a class where we have the rangy Malachi Starks, but then the rest of the group is really the boxer physical safety, right? Like Xavier Watts this past season played closer to the line of scrimmage. Winston's the more physical guy. Nick Emenwari from South Carolina, I'm sure as you're aware, was more of the physical guy there. So I think if a team's looking for somebody on the back end that can fly around and be more of a coverage or a rangy player, Makuba could be there. But any of these three players I could see going in round one. It's kind of going to go against a take or a bold take I have later, so we'll kind of table that discussion for now. But I could honestly see any of these guys making it in.
I kind of want to do transition to your take here just to kind of build off of it a little bit.
Okay,
We, I'll let you give your take first before I say what I want to say.
sounds good. So all the good stuff I just said about Kevin Winston, Andrew Makuba, we threw Xavier Watson there. I'm gonna throw that out the window, and I'm gonna throw Nick Emenwari out the window and Malachi Starks. Despite me having Malachi Starks as a top 10 player in this class, there are just some times where safeties aren't taken. And I understand the caliber of player that Malachi Starks is. He's very good. I think he's right in the he's not Kyle Hamilton. I don't think we're going to see another Kyle Hamilton level prospect for some time, but he's right in the next tier of prospect to me, like in the Brian Branch group, close to the Derwin James group. And Derwin James went quite late in his draft, if I recall correctly. I believe 24th is where he went to the Chargers, or 21st, one of those. And he was talked about as a top 5 prospect in that one. Isaiah Simmons, that's kind of an iffy one, like the safety linebacker. But I'm getting to the point because I talked about on our podcast today, Perfect Takes, about safeties and the current value that they have around the league, where they're often changing teams. Teams are often picking them to fit specific schemes. And I think that when push comes to shove, if teams are drafting for need in the first round, which back half teams often do, I could see them favoring a position that's closer to the trenches, especially teams that like to build, inside out from the trenches, or even the Cowboys today talked about. I believe it was their head coach Schottenheimer talked about building outside in, but that was with receivers and corners, and then the trenches, not really safeties. My point, I guess, that I'm trying to make is that safety is probably the lowest on the totem pole for a lot of organizations out there. Maybe like center and tight end as well. But I think people are going to favor the top tight ends heavier in this class than they will the top safeties. And I could really see Starks, Emanwari, and any of the guys you mentioned sliding to that 33 to 35 range where we're going to get calls from teams and say, all right, give us the first pick of the second round. We'll give you whatever it takes, our second and a fourth, and swoop up and get them, and then they can be the plug and play player, just like Brian Branch was.
Yeah, and I think these are really talented players, like you're saying. You have Malachi Starks as a top 10 player on your personal board.
Mhm.
I I want to think that, over the past few years, the value of safety, getting a really talented young safety has gone up. Maybe that's just not the case, right? You see Brian Branch fall, you see other guys fall out of the first round. There
Even
isn't.
not to interrupt, but Kyle Hamilton was probably the best or second best prospect in that class. I know he was number one on my board, and he makes it all the way to 14, I believe, with the Ravens, who, funnily enough, also took a center in the first round of that class. So both players, it turned out to be very, very good for them.
I think the two, or I should, let's say, three highest drafted safeties of the past, I don't know, maybe 10 years. This is just kind of me trying to think of the history. I don't remember exactly, but Minka Fitzpatrick went, I believe, it was 13th to the Dolphins.
Mhm.
Jamal Adams went 6th to the New York
The
Jets in
Jets.
2017, and then Kyle Hamilton, 14th to the Baltimore Ravens. I think the other one is Malik Hooker to the Colts in 2017 as
Yeah.
well. I think that those are, excluding Hooker, really high level players, or at least had all pro level seasons in the case of Jamal Adams, who kind of fell off here recently. But you look at a guy like Malachi Starks, he's not really the type of prospect that any of those guys were
Right.
outside of Hooker, right? So I do think there is some truth in the sense that he could fall on draft night. And even Eman Wari, I don't think he's close to the level of prospect that Starks is either. Um, I just want to think that the value of safety, especially seeing the success of guys like Brian Branch, has maybe gone up a little bit, especially towards the back half of the first round, where the hit rate just. I was looking at picks 25 through 32, kind of the hit rate on those, and it's a lot lower than what people probably think it is. Like, you're not exactly guaranteed a starter at those picks, much less an all pro caliber player. And I think, at least in my head, you have a better chance of, selecting a player that's not necessarily a premier position and hitting on a guy like Brian Branch versus, taking the seventh or eighth best player at a, position that's considered premium, right? So maybe that's just me kind of overthinking it a little bit, but we'll see who's right on draft day. Who ends up being more correct in the sense of how many safeties are going to go. Is it going to be 0, 1 to 2, maybe Eman Wari and Starks go, or 3 plus if maybe Winston can slide in there as well.
Well, and I would bring up a couple things or pose some questions to you as well. The Lions that year took Jack Campbell, a linebacker, in the first round over Branch, right? He was 18th, I think, or something. He was around that pick range. And I guess what I'm bringing up is when you get to out of your first round grade range, so let's say 20, right? That 20 to 45, 50 range, you're going to have a lot of the same graded players, but
Oh
then
yeah.
how are teams going to view how important a safety is to them, right? I'm team draft good players, right? As long as you have stable things in place, like a quarterback, a good somebody good on your D line, somebody good on your O line, that kind of thing. I think good players can help your team. But what's the case going to be when we get to, let's say, the Buffalo Bills, who pick 30th, who, by the way, need safety help, but are they going to view, if they have Starks or Eamon in the same vein as the 40th player who's also a wide receiver, what are they going to view that's more important? And I guess that's really my line of thinking. Just that safeties have been devalued. I really think they have, because you look at Adams, Hooker, who are both. I think Hooker was 11th that year, and then Fitzpatrick and Hamilton. Those guys stand above the rest, and we don't really see early safeties taken. I don't know. This just seems like a group that could slide to me, and it would be a real shame, because I think Starks deserves to go early, and I could see Eamon Worry having a good role in the NFL as well. But it's just going to come down to what teams prefer, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. Same vein as my Tet McMillan bold take from earlier.
Yeah, no, that Lions draft is such an interesting case study because I think their first four picks were all not premium
Hmm.
positions, like Jameer Gibbs in the top 15. Obviously, like that's probably the least premier position, arguably, with running back, maybe safety as well. But Jack Campbell, an off ball linebacker. They took Sam Laporta at like the 34th, 35th overall pick, a tight end, and then obviously Brian Branch in the second round as well. And it's worked out for them. Yeah, I think they probably want a little bit more out of a guy like Jack Campbell, but I
Hmm.
mean the other three players, you really couldn't have done much better with those picks.
Yeah, and again, draft good players, right? It's the draft's never going to be 100% even with your first round graded players, but if you can get good play out of positions that maybe aren't like your left tackle or your edge rusher or something, they can provide value for you. That might raise your floor high enough to be able to compete on the big stages, like it has for the Lions in recent years. Other than the fact that they had probably 20 or 30 defenders on IR at the end of last season, that's just unlucky. But I think their draft has paid off for them.
I agree. Let's get into this next bold prediction. I think that three teams that, in all likelihood, will move back in the first half, or excuse me, in the first round of the NFL draft will be the Atlanta Falcons, the Los Angeles Rams, and the Minnesota Vikings. And I kind of want to start this conversation off with the Atlanta Falcons, who didn't really spend anything in free agency. They didn't have the money to, in all honesty. If anything, they lost players by cutting a guy like Grady Jarrett. They only have 5 picks this year. They traded their third round pick for Matt Judon. So that is a pretty high pick. I think top 80 or 90 overall selection for them. So I think that it's kind of a no brainer for them to move back in the first half or first round of the NFL draft. You move back to, maybe pick 22, 23-ish. You might be able to get your third round pick back in this draft. That's something that the Falcons really have to consider when they haven't been able to add virtually any talent. And they're essentially going to be banking on, just Michael Penix being significantly better than what Kirk was. And Kirk was a respectable quarterback the first half of last year. So it's kind of a hard bet to make that, you're going to be improving as a team if, you're not adding any talent to your team.
Yeah, and I wasn't super impressed with Michael Penix toward the end of last year. I thought he played well for like a rookie quarterback, but he didn't inspire the confidence that like Drake May or Jaden Daniels or even the flashes of Caleb Williams did. So it's going to be interesting there. My question to you would be: it takes two to tango, right? So who do you think is going to be willing to move into the first half of this draft, and what kind of prospect do you think that would be for?
So I think there's really two answers to this. I think that there's three first round caliber tackles in my head that, could probably step in and start on day one. That's Will Campbell, Armand Membu, and Kelvin Banks. I think realistically, if a team's going to trade up to this 15-ish range, it's probably going to be for either one of those guys Or I could see a guy like maybe Colston Loveland. There's a pretty considerable gap between, Colston Loveland and Tyler Warren and the third and fourth best tight end in this class.
Yeah, I agree with you there. Looking at our draft guide, that certainly seems to be the case. And we've seen teams in recent years try to trade up for tight ends. Although it was Brock Bowers last year, who's on a different in a different universe, really, than either of those two guys. I think it was the Rams that tried to trade up for him last year. So you could
They were
always see
very
that kind of
aggressive.
happen. Yeah, and the Raiders were just having none of it. Or I think it was the Jets that they were trying to trade with, and the Jets ultimately ended up moving back one spot with the Vikings and still selecting a starting tackle for them this year in Olu Fashanu. So good bit of business there by the Jets. You also said Rams and Vikings, and I know the Vikings, we're looking at the Falcons here of 5 picks. I believe the Vikings have 4 picks, right? Yeah. I think if there's any team that we're talking about trading back from your cluster here, it's got to be the Minnesota Vikings.
Yeah, the Vikings have literally one of their original draft picks that they were allotted. Their first round pick, right? Pick number
Mhm.
24. They got pick 97 from Kirk Cousins signing with the Falcons. That's a compensatory selection. And then they have a fifth and seventh round pick, or fifth and sixth round pick from different teams as well. So they only have one of their original picks. This is kind of the result of their shenanigans trading up for JJ McCarthy, trading up for Dallas Turner. I think that this is probably the most obvious trade back scenario, even if they're only going to add like, a high day 3 pick or maybe a super late day 2 pick. If they're able to, slot into maybe 30th, 31st overall and add, one of those types of picks, maybe 2 picks, I think that's something that they really have to consider because end of day, the most successful teams in the draft are typically the ones that have the most ammo. It really does come down to the draft being a crapshoot most times, right?
Mhm.
And having 4 shots, 4 bites at the apple is just not necessarily a sustainable strategy. And I don't think the Vikings had that many picks last year after their trade ups for McCarthy for Dallas Turner. So I think this is a team where I still think they have some holes, like in the secondary. I still think they need a running back, probably, even though they traded for Jordan
Jordan
Mason and gave
Mason.
him a
Yeah.
2-year extension. I don't think Jordan Mason's all that, but I still think they need some investment in that room and the secondary in particular. And, with only one pick in the top 2 rounds and it being a late first round pick, it's going to be something that they're going to have to probably maneuver around in order to kind of solve those rooms.
Yeah, and we were just singing their praises a couple weeks ago on this podcast, right? About how the work they did on their fronts in free agency. They better hope JJ McCarthy is good out the gate because they're not bringing in a ton of youthful reinforcements with these draft picks. I think that you're right. This is probably the most obvious one. Even if they trade into the second round and pick up like a 2 and a 3, getting as many dartboards, especially top 100 dartboards that you can, is the way to do it. Like you said, nothing is for sure here, right? These are all dart throws or bites at the apple, as you mentioned, and they're gonna need the rookie scale contract players to help fill out the rest of that team because they spent big already, so they don't have a ton left there.
They've spent big at a lot of different players over the past 2 years. Jonathan Grenard, Andrew Van Ginkel, Jonathan Allen, Javon Hargreave. And they signed Byron Murphy to a pretty substantial contract at corner as well. I think that was a 3 year, $60+ million contract. So this is a team that's spent a lot of money on older veterans, and they haven't really hit on many draft picks in recent memory. So it's something where their infrastructure of their team could get very weak very quickly if they don't hit on some young guys on some rookie scale contracts.
For sure, but if there's any like non Super Bowl perennial playoff team or infrastructure that I trust recently, it's the Vikings. I think there's 4 teams in the past 6 seasons that have won 7 or more games. It's going to be the Chiefs, the Bills, obviously the Steelers because they haven't had losing seasons, and the 4th one is the Minnesota Vikings. So I think they have the important things in place but they really got to hit on draft picks this year to address some of the ancillary needs like running back and maybe a safety on their team.
The last team that I kind of want to hit on here is the Los Angeles Rams. I think with them, the calculus is pretty simple. They typically value day two and early day three picks. And
Mhm.
they also, over the past 2 years, have just had a strategy of having as many draft picks as possible. I think they've drafted like 22 players over the past 2 years. And obviously, they have 8 picks already, but I could see them being a team where even if they only take 80 cents on the dollar, I could see them easily moving back to like, pick 34, 35. Maybe it's one of those teams trying to come up and get a fifth year option on a guy like Jackson Dart. Maybe Shador Sanders falls. Maybe it's even a guy like Jalen Milrow, right? Where it's just a team trying to get into the back half of the first round, get their quarterback ahead of, you know, maybe the Browns at 33 or somebody else in the early second. So I can see the Rams moving back, getting a pick in that sort of range and just loading up in the, late top 100, early, top 150 maybe. So I could see the Rams doing that. And I also don't necessarily think that what they need is going to match up with where they're picking either. Like this is a team that has desperately wanted to add a pass catching tight end for the longest time, right?
Mhm.
And there's just not one that's worth pick 26. And this is assuming that Loveland and Warren are likely going to be gone by this point. But I love the idea of a guy like Mason Taylor to them. It's hard to get behind Taylor to the Rams if they're, picking at 26. And I don't think they're going to get him at pick 90 either.
That might be another bonus bold take here that Mason Taylor is the guy at 26. But I agree with you. You said that they had, what was it, 21 or 22 picks over the last 2 years. It's not just the last 2 years that they picked a lot. In the Les Snead, like F them picks era where they had no first round picks in I think it was a 6 year span, the Rams actually made the second most draft selections. They just weren't first round picks. And not only do they like making those picks, they hit on these picks, right? They've rebuilt their defense, rebuilt some of their skill positions with these late day two, early day three picks, with these compensatory picks. And if there's any team that knows how to do that, like how to take 80 cents on the dollar, how to extract the value from the middle of the draft there, it's going to be the Los Angeles Rams. So could certainly see them being a team that if their Sanders or Dart fall, this could be the team that trades back and gives, I don't know, the Browns or somebody a chance to get another quarterback in the first round.
Let's move on to your next take.
Yeah, and to the vein of maybe the Rams being a team that moves back or somebody toward the end of the first round, I think the Patriots really want an offensive lineman, want somebody to play left tackle, right? They didn't address that in free agency. All the stuff that they did has been across the team, right? Milton Williams, they gave a ton of money to. Stephon Diggs, they brought in on essentially a 1 year deal, but it looks like three. They've tried to address a lot of things. They signed the corner from Detroit, brought Harold Landry, reunited him with Vrabel. And the one main gap left on the team is left tackle. And like you said earlier, I think the top three guys are going to be gone around where the Falcons pick, or somebody's going to try to move up and get them. Maybe it's the Patriots that moves up early to get them, but I really think that they're going to be in the market for that next tackle. Like in that next group, we're talking Josh Simmons, if they're convicted on his medicals being good, Connerly from another Josh Connerly from Oregon, Ariante Ursary from Minnesota. Any of these guys, if they're convicted enough, and I think they will be, to protect Drake May, who showed pretty good flashes last year, they're going to be a team that's going to move up and get them. And when it comes to cost for this, they have an early second round pick. And I mean, I think they'd be willing to give a couple of day threes, maybe their third, and get a fourth back or something like that to make the draft chart work, because we still use that in 2025. I think that they're going to be willing to move up. And I think Josh Simmons is going to be the guy that sticks out ahead of the next group of tackles, so to speak.
Yeah, I think that Josh Simmons would make sense. He's a player that obviously has a higher ceiling than maybe what he showed in 2024, just due to injury, right?
Mhm.
But I think the Patriots are a team. They have extra draft capital on day two as well, so they could very easily package pick 34, I think it is, and one of their third round picks and get into that, like we were talking about with the Rams, like that 26, 27 range where Josh Simmons might be available, right? I think in terms of like a fit, Josh Connerly seems like a Vrabel type of left tackle where he
Mhm.
has all of the traits that you would want at left tackle. It's just kind of about putting it together with him. Josh Simmons, I think he's obviously a very good player, probably going to go in the first round, but I feel like Connerly just makes a little bit more sense for a Vrabel team in particular. Regardless, I think that, trading up into the first round for a left tackle, especially when you already have a guy like Stephon Diggs, the Patriots, regardless, I think are going to have to add a receiver on day two, whether it's in the second or third round. Maybe it's a guy like Jalen Knoll. Maybe it's a player like, I don't know, Jack Besh, right? There's a few different options for them when it comes to, players that they could add. Obviously, Jalen Polk didn't work out the way that they wanted to. Neither did Javon Baker, really, with them. So I think that, just solidifying the line, I think Vrabel is going to be somebody that wants to build through the trenches in particular, especially like just protect your up and coming quarterback that looks to be a future star.
Yeah, I'm agreeing with everything you're saying, and I should preface this by saying the Patriots are going to get a guy like Abdul Carter or Travis Hunter at that number 4 selection. Should two QBs go ahead, and that's really where this scenario is going to kick in. You said they might add a receiver later. They could add their receiver at pick 4 with Travis Hunter should he be
Yeah.
on the table. And then this is just a roundabout way to get to the Patriots. If it goes Ward, Carter, Hunter, then they're going to go O line at 4. That would be my guess. But the way the tea leaves are moving, if Shador Sanders makes it into the top 3, and they have to settle, like, oh gosh, they have to settle for Abdul Carter or somebody, then they're going to have to move back up into round 1 to get that left tackle.
Yeah, and I think the Patriots are such an interesting team because, like you said, it's really going to be about who's there at 4 between Carter and Hunter, and if not, then are they going to be willing to? In my opinion, it would be a slight reach if they take a guy like Will Campbell at number 4. But do you see any issue with them kind of addressing that hole, even if it is maybe not the best value at 4, or could you see them maybe taking a surprise at that pick compared to what most people might expect? Maybe an Ashton Genty or a guy like I don't know, like Mason Graham, for instance.
I mean, Vrabel was used to having a bell cow back in Tennessee, right, with Derrick Henry, and they're not the same player, right? Derrick Henry's a physical anomaly, but I think Ashton Genty's value, at least on my big board, certainly warrants it. I don't know how high a running back is going to go in today's NFL, although we did just talk about Jameer Gibbs. I think, and to contradict one of my earlier takes, that if they want to go receiver early and they're super convicted on McMillan being a guy that has like a wingspan, a physical profile that 3 or 4 NFL receivers only have in the league. Maybe they're convicted on a guy like that. Maybe they want to pair Mason Graham with some of the defensive line additions like Milton Williams. Any of that could happen. Like the draft, the fun part of the draft for me is going to start with them and how it ends up stacking there. Like if the 2 guys go before them, how are they going to Campbell, Graham? What are they going to do? Could they be a surprising trade team? Like I think this new regime with Elliot Wolf kind of manning the front office is still somewhat of an unknown because for so long we had Bill Belichick kind of in charge of everything there. So I'm excited to see what they do. Either way, they got to walk away with a left tackle early.
Yeah, I think it would be pretty disastrous if they don't walk away with a left tackle in the first 35 picks, right? Maybe a
Mhm.
guy's able to follow them in the early second. But moving on to the next bold take, I think the Browns are going to pass on a quarterback at second overall, but then trade back into the first for whoever's available of Shador Sanders, Jalen Milrow, or Jackson Dart. I don't think the value of quarterback at number 2 in this draft class is worthy of the Browns actually selecting one, right? A
Right.
lot of people over the past, several months or even the past year have kind of just slotted in Sanders as a certified top 3 pick. I just don't think the talent matches that. And up until recently, I still thought that he would probably go second, third overall. But recently, it kind of seems as though things are trending in the opposite direction, with the Browns maybe going in the direction of Travis Hunter, who they view as a receiver, or Abdul Carter, an edge prospect. So either way, whatever they decide to do, I personally would take, Travis Hunter, just an incredible all around talent, generational in every sense of the word. It's not often that that word is actually applicable to the guys it's used on, but he is a rare case where it is. Uh, Regardless of whatever they decide to do with second overall, I think that they're probably going to try and trade back into the first. They have an owner who, decided to trade and sign Deshaun Watson to just this enormous contract. They gave up a lot of draft capital to get him, but it's an owner that's pretty impatient in that sense, just trying to find that guy. It seems like they take a swing on quarterback basically every year before Deshaun Watson. So I think that it's a team where, maybe Sanders does fall to the 20s, right? I don't think it's out of the question that that's a possibility. You see on this ESPN, if you're watching on, YouTube or Twitter, you can see this graphic of, the odds that Shador Sanders could be taken with each draft pick. And he could fall all the way to 18, according to this chart, maybe even further. So non-zero chance he makes it to, the 20s, where he's within reaching distance of the Cleveland Browns, maybe trading up. But maybe it's more of a guy like, Jalen Milroe, who I think regardless of whatever team he lands on, if he's going to play, year one, whatever team drafts him is going to have immediately a top 5 rushing attack in the NFL. You can say what you
Yeah.
can about his arm. You can make critiques about that, but he would at least, I think the floor of what you're getting of an offense with Jalen Milroe is higher just because he has that rushing capability. So I think he's a guy that could possibly go higher than people expect. I just think that the Browns are going to try and get their quarterback solution on day one this year.
Yeah, I have to agree with you there. You talked about the owner or the ownership group being impatient there. They actually, at the owners meeting, I think it started yesterday on Monday, and was the main thing was today. The owners actually took onus of the Watson mistake. Trying when they were asked about Andrew Berry, they kind of defended them, or defended Berry, saying the Watson thing, that's on us. You need to blame the Haslams there, the ownership family, and them taking that step and admitting it really kind of signals that, hey, we need to try and get another quarterback in there, because like we're talking about with Watson and his contract, it's all guaranteed. They've pushed it forward so much just to be able to operate within the confines of each season, that I think that they want the rookie scale wage on the quarterback. And like you're saying, they've been taking swings on quarterbacks forever. I think we're just kind of numb to it with them having to absorb Deshaun Watson's contract. So I really do think they go QB. I could see them maybe staying pat at pick. I believe they have 33, and then taking, if one of these guys falls, or if they're, and I know this is an uncredible, or someone who's not super credible, the report, but it was interesting, or it was intimated that they were interested in Tyler Shuck, the 25, currently 25-year-old Louisville prospect, 7th-year prospect in college. I think his floor is quite high. I think his ceiling is also limited. So I'm not super sure about that one. But I think if they want to take a chance on a quarterback that has the potential to be a franchise guy, they got to do it on day one. And although I'm in the same boat as you, I don't think Shador Sanders' talent level, prospect level should be reflected as the number 2 overall pick. I really think it's between Ward and then the next group of Sanders, Milroe, that have a slim chance of being a franchise QB. And I think you have to capitalize on that chance until you get your guy, right? So I'm fully with you on this one. Like, the Browns are taking a QB early, and they're going to have to keep swinging until they make the hit.
Yeah, and maybe they stay at, pick 33. They have the first pick in the second round. So maybe they just take whoever's there for them at that pick. I don't think there's going to be more than 3 guys that go in the first round.
Yeah.
So getting a guy like maybe Jalen Milroe, maybe a Tyler Shuck. I think Shuck would be interesting, just in the sense that, a second round pick in theory for what you would assume is just a bridge quarterback for 1 or 2 years. Maybe it's like a Davis Mills type of situation for the Browns, just kind of tiding them over until they get off of that Deshaun Watson deal. I think that would be interesting, but again, I don't necessarily expect Shuck to be this franchise level quarterback. So, moving on to your next take, go ahead.
Yeah, we talked about receivers and safeties in almost every other position except for corner, and I think corner is one of the sneaky rich classes or rich position groups of this class, but only in the top 10 or so, right? I think we're going to see four or more of them go on day one. And I am including Travis Hunter in this because, as you can see, he is listed as corner and wide receiver. Until we know, we have to include him in both. So he's going to go there. Will Johnson is a guy that's regarded very, very highly. He's probably the consensus corner two. I think he'll find his way taken on day one. Jahdae Barron, a guy from Texas who he's kind of a multi-purpose DB. He played a lot in the slot this year, a lot on the outside. I think he's played his way into round one discussions as well. And then Siobhan Ravel, Benjamin Morrison, some of these guys that were kind of mocked as top 20 players coming into the draft process, coming into the not draft process, their season this year, but had some pretty bad injuries and that maybe pushed them down. I think we're going to see one of them find their way into the end of the first round. When I was talking about safeties falling in teams in that 20 to 45 group on their board, what do they really prioritize? I think teams are more likely to prioritize a corner over a safety if their grades are similar. I think that's a much bigger need for most teams in the league. And that's where we're going to see Ravel go. I think Barron's past that point. I think he's going to go in the top 20. Trey Amos might sneak in. He's got that good, like, prototypical size you want. We talked about Hairston like a month ago when we were on here about how he wowed with his speed at the combine. That might have played him into the back end of the first round. You never know. But I think we are going to see a group of corners go on day one, and that group's going to be at least four.
Yeah, I think after Travis Hunter, it's kind of a situation where you're picking your flavor of corner,
Mm-hmm.
right? You have your fast guy with Maxwell Harrison. I think Amos has a pretty high floor compared to most prospects, but he's probably more of a day two guy. Barron, if you need somebody that's going to be a reliable, slot corner, I think he's probably who you're going to take. And Will Johnson just has a tremendous ceiling. So I think it's going to
Mm-hmm.
come down to, you know, what type of flavor do teams really want in their corner? And what one guy I didn't list is Darian Porter, the Iowa State corner, who has a very weird profile. 24 years
Yeah.
old. Our friend Steve does not like Darian Porter, but he's got an interesting profile that I think teams might like a little bit more than we do. Where career special teams guy. He spent 6 years in college. 24 years old. This was really his first year starting for most of it, and he performed very well in a zone scheme in college. And he's long, he's fast, and just the traits are really nice. But again, he's 24 years old, so it's kind of a situation where he has all these traits but didn't really do anything until this past year. So maybe he could sneak into the first round, but like you said, there's just a ton of different guys in this class where you look at them and you think, yeah, he could feasibly go in round one. And I agree. I think that's, and it's going to end up being for maybe five guys that end up sneaking in there. I think Hunter, Johnson, Barron, all not, maybe not locks in Barron's case, but I think as close to a lock as you can get with both him and Johnson. And then it just takes one more to kind of meet that fourth threshold, whether it's Ravel, whether it's Hairston, whether it's Darian Porter, maybe Amos or Thomas sneak in there. But yeah, I like this take. I think it's pretty likely to happen on draft night.
Yeah, probably the most likely of any of my takes so far. With Porter, it's interesting because if you take him, at least you have the floor of him being a gunner, right? Or like a
Right.
special teams ace. It reminds me of Ricky White, the receiver from UNLV. When I was doing his report, he had 4 blocked punts this past season, and I believe 1 punt return touchdown as well. So if there's anything that NFL teams like when they're drafting players, it's players that can play on special teams. So if Porter somehow doesn't figure it out at corner, even though I think he showed encouraging tape this year, maybe he can be a career special teams guy. And we'll have to see what Steve thinks of where he goes on draft night.
Yeah, it'll be interesting if we have Steve on the draft show and it's pick 20 or so, and Darian Porter's name comes up. I also think it's kind of funny because it almost reminds me of when Adoree Jackson was going through the process where
Mhm.
he was a trades guy, obviously younger than what Porter was coming out, but they showed his highlights on draft night and it was all return touchdowns, right? Obviously, this is a different type of special teams where it's like a gunner and somebody that's had like 5 or 6 blocked kicks in college. Of course, that's over again. Like he played at Iowa State for like 5, 6 years. So, um,
That would be
just
Ron Rivera's favorite player as a rookie.
yeah, it would be Ron Rivera, maybe Bill Belichick. Um,
Mhm.
but yeah, I think he's somebody that could sneak in there. But in all likelihood, probably more of a second round guy. So, moving on to my next take, kind of similar. I think 3 running backs are going to go in the first round. Genty, of course, he's a lock, maybe top 10 lock at this point, whether it's the Raiders or Chicago Bears that select him. I think Amari and Hampton has a lot of suitors in the first round. I think that the Chargers, for instance, would be a really nice fit for him. Somebody that would work really well in a offense under Jim Harbaugh, right? I think that maybe the Steelers would take a guy like Amari and Hampton, which I think would be kind of funny after having Najee Harris for four
Yeah.
years. But I think that's a potential fit. Maybe the Broncos. I really like him in a Sean Payton offense as well. But I do think that Amari and Hampton, whoever it is, he could even go to the Bears at 10. That
Yeah.
would not surprise me at all. Um, I think that he's going to go first round. And then I also think that a guy like Travion Henderson is pretty likely to go first round. Not as likely as Hampton or Genty, but he just profiles so similar to kind of what Jameer Gibbs was coming out of Alabama, where it's just a hyper efficient running back that has some pass catching upside, who was just incredibly explosive, just a weapon on the perimeter. I think some team is going to fall in love with what he is able to do with the ball in his hands, and maybe enough to justify taking him first round. Maybe the Vikings make a little bit of sense with him. They need a running back. Maybe they trade back a few spots, like we were talking about earlier, and take a guy like Travion Henderson.
Yeah, I really like this running back class. And the argument against this is going to be, well, the class is so deep, right? Why would you take one day one when you could get Quinshot Junkins on in round two or Dylan Sampson in round two? And the answer to that would be they aren't Ashton Genty, they aren't Amari and Hampton, right? These high end players have to go at some point. They aren't going to continuously fall because all 32 teams aren't going to wait for them to fall, right? I would stake my claim now that Genty's a top 10 lock. I think Hampton is around that top 23, wherever the Chargers, I think they're 21. The Chargers, the Steelers, the Broncos, they're all in that cluster there. All of those teams could fit. The Vikings 24 as well. And then some of these guys, it's pick your flavor, right? Travion Henderson, I think, is the home run hitter between him and Judkins, but I think Judkins can be more of a power runner. Caleb Johnson is a very patient runner. When you combine that with his size, could be pretty deadly with the right team. And then you have Dylan Sampson, who another super burner reminds me. I don't know if he's quite as fast as Devon Achan was, but when I was trying to find a comparison, that's who came to mind. Just because he can get to the sideline and really go. I'm not sure about Cam Scatabo being this above Sampson. I think he's running back 7 or 8 for me. But he has his uses, right? We saw toward the end of Arizona State's season how he could be used as a rusher, receiver, and even a passer in some instances. So he has uses and could sneak into the second round, maybe early second round. But that's like the crop of running backs is going to push the really good ones to the top, and that's where I think we could see Travion Henderson or Judkins sneaking in the last 8 or so picks, something like that.
Yeah, yeah. It's kind of funny. I think Scatabo would be like a perfect Raider in the second round, maybe for
Yeah,
for them. Like if they end up passing on a guy like Ashton Genty, he just seems like such a Pete Carroll type of guy. But yeah, like I said, I think that Genty, Hampton are pretty much first round locks at this point. And it's just it only takes one team with these other guys. Like I really do think Henderson's a step above the rest in terms of like Caleb Johnson, Quinshon Judkins, Dylan Sampson, uh, I know some people like Jaden Blue in the second round. I'm not quite there on him, but I think that Travion Henderson is a step above those guys. I think that, between Genty, Hampton, and Henderson, I think you have three guys that project to be Pro Bowlers at the running back position. And then you have a bunch of solid starters or split backfield guys after that. So moving on to your next take, you have Texas leading all schools in first round draft picks this year.
And it might sound crazy when we have teams like Georgia that always turn out talent. Michigan has a lot of good players. I'm trying to think. Ohio State just won the national championship, so that's likely to boost some of their players. But when we look at Texas, and this is why it's a bold take, I think you can lock in Kelvin Banks, their left tackle. Matthew Golden, I think, has received enough steam throughout the draft process to be locked in as a first rounder. I think Jahdae Barron is going to be that third corner, maybe the fourth corner, if a team is really good on like Ravel or Benjamin Morrison's medical. So I think those three super locks, safe locks. But this is where we start to see other players sneak in. Andrew Makuba, somebody that we look at in one of your takes, could find his way into the back end of the first round. If a team's looking for a rangy safety, he can play across the field, pursues the ball carrier well. Alfred Collins is one of the better nose tackles in this class. I know a lot of people lean to Kenneth Grant. They lean to Deion Walker because Walker is just a mammoth of a human. I think Alfred Collins put out a lot of really good tape this year in a defensive line that was kind of bereft of high-end talent after two of the Texas defensive linemen were taken early in last year's draft. Collins really made the most of it, played the run really, really well. I could see if there's a team in the back 6 to 8 picks that needs an enforcer nose tackle, that could be somebody that goes. And while I'm not as high on Cameron Williams, especially this past year, his tape throughout his career is pretty solid. And I think if a team needs a plug and play right tackle, that could be someone that they convince themselves of. And then the last one is the true wild card in Isaiah Bond. When he was at Alabama, people projected him to be a first round pick receiver. When he came to Texas, he was supposed to be the guy coming off of a season at Alabama where he had the catch in the Iron Bowl to beat Auburn on the 4th and 31. That was supposed to like launch him into wide receiver one stardom. Didn't really happen that way. Matthew Golden kind of took his chain at the end of Texas's season, but Isaiah Bond, super talented, really smooth route runner, has the speed in the hands that everybody wants. He was really used more as a decoy in Steve Sarkisian's offense this past season. So I think if there's a team that can look at his route running, his fluidity as he moves, and his speed, and thinks this is a guy that we could pair and be like our wide receiver 2 or something, he could really sneak into the back end of the first round. The only hang up there, or one of the hang ups there, is recently people have alluded to there being character stuff off the field on the same level as Jermaine Burton, who's been kind of had a rocky start to his tenure with the Bengals. So
It's a nice way to put it.
yeah, another former Alabama guy for a brief time. But if those allegations or those remarks hold weight, that could really affect his stock, because I think talent-wise, Burton had all the makings of a top 45 to 50 pick last year, and he ended up going, I think, 81 or 91 to the Cincinnati Bengals, maybe even later than that. Maybe I'm misremembering. But I think Bond has all the talent in the world to sneak into the back end of the first, but it's going to come down to teams. Does the off-field stuff check out? Is he good with that? And can they project him being used as a decoy? Can they see the upside when he did have the ball as being a high-end producer? And that's how he gets into the back end of the first.
Yeah, I think Banks, Barron, Golden are probably locks at this point. And then it's more of guys that you could feasibly see sneaking into the first round, like Alfred Collins, Makuba, Williams, Bond. With Williams, he's interesting to me in particular because a lot of times you see right tackles, like career right tackles, pushed up into the first round for teams that kind of need that position in particular. A guy like Isaiah Wilson a few years ago.
Yeah.
Obviously a very different situation with that because the Titans, I think they lost Jack Conklin and then never filled that position. So they kind of reached on a guy that wasn't projected to go round one. And he only played one career game for them. So hopefully Cameron Williams is going to be a better player than that. obviously, but I could see him. I hadn't really thought about that as a possibility with him possibly
Mhm.
being a first round pick. But yeah, Alfred Collins has his fans for sure. The size and athleticism combination there is kind of hard to match in this class, even if he is, more of a run stuffer than, a third down type of player at this point. But yeah, I like this take. I don't think they'll have the most first round picks. I think that, a team like Michigan probably coming off of, 1 year after Harbaugh left, like the talent kind of spilling over, whether it's, Mason Graham, Kenneth Grant, Will Johnson, Colston Loveland. I think those four guys are probably more likely to go than maybe a fourth Texas player. But I could easily see, it being like maybe only three of those players, and then, one of these Texas guys sneaks in as well. So
Yeah, it's where the bold part comes in. It just takes one team to like Collins more than Grant at their respective positions, and then it could happen. Maybe they tie for first is something more feasible. But that's not bold.
not bold, not bold, but I like the Texas prediction. I like all of your picks, really. I think the most interesting one that you had was probably McMillan potentially falling to day two, where, I just think that, the NFL is not quite as high on Ted McMillan as maybe what the media is. I thought that was very interesting. But
Yeah, and
um,
not to step on your heels or anything, but I got it from reading your mock draft. I kind of thought about it like if he's able to slide all the way down to Detroit at 28, I think is where they pick. It only takes four more to pass on him.
yeah, I'm trying to look at, like, maybe 2022, whether there was a receiver that nope, it was Jonathan Mingo.
Yeah,
Um,
well,
look,
Josh Downs was he was in that class, right? He was kind of talked about in the first round, but he's also like a foot shorter than Ted McMillan, right? So that one's not really
yeah,
a one for one comp.
maybe Elijah Moore wasn't really projected to go super high. He was more of a day two guy.
Yeah.
T. Higgins, Michael Pittman, maybe those two. Again, those are two taller receivers. There was a lot of defensive players drafted in front of them. Uh, Maybe it's a situation like that. Even the Chiefs took Clyde Edwards-Helaire, one pick over T. Higgins. Probably regret that right now, but um, yeah, I like this one in particular. But do you have any final comments on any of the predictions that we made?
Yeah, on your end, the Emeka Egbuka one stood out to me, not just because it's kind of mirroring my or like helps my receiver take, but like I said on draft Twitter, and I know draft Twitter isn't the end all be all of things, but there's been a lot of love and a lot of steam for Egbuka being one of the guys in this class recently. And I wonder if that's just smoke or if there's fire to the smoke. And maybe teams view his high floor ability to step in and be probably at worst a very, very good slot receiver is probably his floor, right? Like a 700-yard slot receiver I think is
Yeah,
very, very feasible for him his rookie year with the upside of, hey, Jackson Smith and Jigba was only slot in college. Look what he became. I know it's not the same level of athleticism, but Justin Jefferson was only slot in college. He's the best receiver in the NFL right now. So maybe if a team can convince themselves that, hey, once we get him outside of having to play within Marvin Harrison Jr. and Jeremiah Smith, some of these otherworldly like titans of receivers, maybe we can get something out of him there. He's the only one that stayed for 4 years, and he wasn't super productive his true freshman year just because he had Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave playing over him. But he stayed all 4 years and made the most out of it. Also, Travion Henderson, 4-year player, productive all 4 years. Maybe teams like that and say, hey, this is a guy that can do it with whoever's in the backfield that pushes him into the first round.
yeah, yeah. No, I agree. I think Emeka Egbuka is somebody that, like I said, he's just kind of a least common denominator type of receiver. Like,
Mm-hmm.
just looking at the draft order, you know, any team from, like, I'm just going to list off, like, starting at pick 10 with Chicago. I think they could feasibly take him. The Cowboys could take him to pair him with
Yeah.
CeeDee Lamb, right? I think the Cardinals could take him. It would be kind of fun to see a Marv Harrison Egbuka pairing, a few years later. I think that he would work well on a team like Denver, maybe Pittsburgh as a wide receiver too if they trade George Pickens. I think the Chargers would make some sense. Maybe the Packers or the Houston Texans. So there's so many teams. Like that's just every team from 10 to 25 that makes some sort of sense with Egbuka. And there's just so many potential fits with him that I think it's hard not to see him having a high floor because of that.
Yeah, probably the most scheme agnostic receiver at the top of the class, other than Hunter, who's just different.
He's different for sure. But we'll go ahead and get out of here. I want to thank everybody who's watching live or on the podcast feed. We launched our website on Monday. We have some content on there. We have a mock draft simulator as well. We have a
Mhm.
big board builder, so you can fill out your own big board top 32 picks. We've got a mock draft on there. So check out our website, 2pointconversion.com. Subscribe to our YouTube, subscribe to our Spotify, Apple Podcasts, rate us on there as well. Um, Jacob, me, our friend Steve, and Colt, our graphic designer, have been working on a draft guide that will hopefully come out in the near future. So stay tuned for that. But yeah, I appreciate you, Jacob, for hopping on the pod with me today. And